welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Vladimir Solokhub. Join me now to discuss the results of the most recent work of the IMF Mission to Ukraine. Is the resident representative of the International Monetary Fund Mission to Ukraine, Mr. Jerome Vacher. Mr. Vacher, welcome to Ukraine Today.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Vacher, just a couple of days ago, the IMF Mission completed its work here in Ukraine. And there was quite a number of meetings with government representatives. Can you tell us in more detail how did the work of the mission go here in Kyiv? Who did they meet with?
Well, we had what we call a mission for the second review of the extended fund facility, which is a 4-year program that we have started last year. So for this second review, we, like for any type of review that we do, we meet not only with government representatives, but of course with the NBU, which is also an important interlocutor, but also with representatives of the private sector, with civil society, with members of parliament. So we try also to have a diverse set of interlocutors so we can form a view on the situation in the economy, on the different policies that are needed. And typically the work of a review is basically twofold. One is backward looking at the performance of both of the economy, but also of a number of indicators that allow us to assess the policies, for example on the fiscal side or on the monetary policy side. And a forward-looking element which basically is to understand what are the commitments that the authorities are ready to take, what type of policies they envisage for the future, and in the end whether we would be in a position to support these policies going forward.
Mr. Vacher, in the official statement by the IMF following this review here in Kyiv, the IMF indicated that the mission noted some progress in restoring the macroeconomic indicators in the country. What particular areas were improved in the view of IMF?
No, I think on the fiscal and monetary policy area, I think it's important to continue on the same path that we have seen. To refrain from the temptation, of course, to spend too much or to change and lower tax rates when it's not feasible to do. But basically the path that we have seen in the past few months and the past year, especially, has been pretty good. One thing which is also important and which is related to fiscal policy is also the progress that we have seen on the energy sector side. Essentially, we had a situation in 2014 with a very large deficit of Naftogaz, the gas company, which is essentially a quasi-fiscal deficit. And this is getting close now. And that is also an important achievement, and it's also an important achievement with respect to the fiscal policies that I have mentioned before.
Is this happening, in your view, is this happening with Naftogaz because of the company's restructuring which is now taking place?
It's, it is an important component of it. I mean, of course, the main component was the increase in tariffs, which allowed to restore the health of the company. But an important component which goes with it was basically to increase the transparency and to improve the governance of the company. So that is also something that we have pushed for and we support it in the context of our program.
What about NBU? What are the steps which the NBU needs to take again for the IMF to adopt a positive decision?
Well, the NBU has been engaged in very decisive policies. I mean, I mentioned before monetary and foreign exchange policy. As you probably remember, we had a very difficult situation, in particular last year, which led to the implementation of controls in particular, which are of course not the first best option, but was something that needed to be done, and in particular to make sure that the foreign exchange market was stabilizing. Now it will be important, and basically since last year we have seen a lot of progress on that front. The situation in terms of reserves, foreign exchange reserves at the central bank is better, but they need to continue to accumulate reserves. And on the financial sector, the NBU had a very good policy of basically strengthening the system. First, by changing and improving the supervisory framework. Quite frankly, for many years, nothing was done to supervise the banking system. So the NBU has changed that, and it's an important step. It has dealt with some of the weak banks, and it has put in place a framework for the recapitalization of banks, but also to address the issues like related party lending in the system, which is quite pervasive. So basically that some owners use the banks for their own means, and that has stability effects that are important to address.
The reason why I was asking about NBU is that we spoke to the chairman of NBU, Ms. Vacher, a month and a half ago, during an investment conference, and she was very confident that her agency is totally ready for any review IMF might have, and that the policies which have been implemented by Ms. Vacher have been sufficient to change the fiscal policies here in Ukraine. Was that the same finding which the mission found?
No, I mean we had basically a very good cooperation with the NBU, and as I mentioned, we have seen tremendous progress on bank supervision in particular, but we have also seen that the institution itself has been able to transform itself and to reform itself to become basically a modern central bank. They have cut the number of staff, they have reorganized the institution, so that's also very important. That allows also to have a much better communication and a technical dialogue which can proceed in a much better way than before.
What about the change of government which took place in Ukraine, namely the replacement of Minister of Finance, which had very good working relations with the IMF in the past? Are you confident that IMF would have the same good working relations with the new Minister of Finance?
We have seen some indications that indeed the government in general would be willing to proceed with and to continue with some of the reforms. One indication of that was in the energy sector, with an increase in gas and heating tariffs, which was needed. But again, we will need to base our assessment on also how things go in the next few weeks and next few months, and see over time how the not only the adoption of certain decisions, but the legislative work proceeds, but also importantly the implementation also proceeds.
Mr. Vacher, if we could go back to former Minister of Finance, Ms. Resco, now that she's out of her government job, there are some experts who are saying that she had such a good working relation with the IMF that she might eventually join IMF. Would you be surprised if that happens?
Look, I think the questions related to what ministers do after their assignment government are probably best to be asked to the people themselves. I have nothing to add.
Was the work between the Minister of Finance and IMF indeed so productive and so mutually understanding? And the question basically was, would you be surprised
as
the IMF representative if it turned out that Monsieur
all what I can say is that we had a good working relationship, good communication with our teams, so that of course makes the process easier. It doesn't change fundamentally the need for some of the policies. But we had a good working relationship, which I hope will continue with the current Minister of Finance, and that of course makes the communication, the technical work as well, much easier. But of course, it doesn't change the policies which are needed.
Well, Mr. Vacher will be definitely following the developments in this area really closely, and thank you very much for finding the time to talk to us. We were discussing the most recent work of the IMF mission in Ukraine in review of Ukraine's policies and decisions which were made by the Ukrainian government with the representative of the IMF to Ukraine, Mr. Jerome Vacher. I'm Vladimir Rasulhub. Thank you for watching Ukraine Today.